Hello, everyone. Chapter 3 of the Yokohama Manifesto is written by Sergio Salvatore, and it is about the place of desire in cultural psychology. Salvatore's chapter is much more technical than what I'm going to present here. It rests on a background of semiotics, an approach to cultural psychology, and an ontology, which he elaborates in the first part of the chapter. My presentation here simplifies his approach, but hopefully it will make a few of you curious about the source material, so you go back to the chapter itself. So I'm going to start with the premise, one simple premise which guides us into the chapter. And the premise is this, that the world is ambiguous. Or another way to put it would be to say there is ambiguity in the world. What does that mean? It means there are many different ways in which we can make sense of situations, same object, same behavior. One given behavior, one given object, one given situation, there are many different ways of making sense of it, interpreting it, giving meaning to it, to the same moment of experience. So it is quite common in cognitive psychology, in a simple-minded cognitive psychology traditions, for example, people who study visual attention, they say, at any given moment in time, we are bombarded by too much information and we cannot select within this broad range of available information. The problem is how to select the relevant object. But the problem is deeper than that. What is available is not just objects to pick from what is available, but also ways of interpreting the available objects. In addition to things to pay attention to, there are also interpretations that are available to us. That's what it means to say the world has ambiguity or is ambiguous. There's a very useful example in this chapter. Imagine that someone meets you at a shopping center, somebody who you have met recently, maybe somebody at work. This person is an acquaintance, not a close friend. So you meet this person at a shopping center, and the person tells you, hey, you're here again to waste money, as usual. You could take this statement as a gesture of friendship. That's one way to interpret what they say. That here, the interpretation is based on the assumption that the person is telling you that we are friendly enough to joke like this, that we don't have to be formal. We can be casual and we can say things to each other that sound like insults, but they're actually friendly. Or you can go another way and say this is an insult. This person is calling me a shopaholic, for example. So there are at least two possible interpretations of what one person tells you, that, hey, you're here again to waste money, as usual. But before one of those two interpretations becomes the official interpretation or becomes the lived interpretation, there is instability and ambiguity before you settle on one of those two. I'm intentionally avoiding the word decision. I'm not saying that you decide, you choose one of those two interpretations, because I don't want to suggest that you intentionally decide among possible interpretations. So we settle on one of those possible interpretations. Once one interpretation becomes the lived interpretation, then you enter into a meaningful and ongoing exchange with the other person. A conversation among possible conversations is foregrounded and other possible conversations are pushed into the background. Or as Salvatore says, you enter into a scenario. A scenario is an ongoing and relatively unambiguous and relatively stable exchange. And it tends to be shared, not just maintained by one person. And it provides the background of further interpretations. So a scenario is an ongoing exchange that provides the background for other acts of interpretation, and it guides our interpretations. There's a point here, just an important point that we should highlight. Acts of interpretation, single acts of interpretations of, for example, the remarks of that friend in that example, and the scenario emerge together. So the scenario is the background, acts of interpretations are individual, particular, foregrounded experiences. But even though one is the background, the other one is the foreground, they emerge and they are constructed together at the same time. Even though one of them might have primacy over the other one, it doesn't have priority in time over the other. So let's make it concrete again. Let's say that you and I are moving from being acquaintances to becoming friends, moving from acquaintanceship to friendship. Friendship isn't a single act. It's a context. It is a background. Friendship is a scenario. And this scenario allows me to interpret your behavior, interpret your statements as a friend's statements, not as a stranger's statements or as an enemy's statements. But the scenario of friendship itself depends on acts of interpretation. So first I need to look at your behavior and you at my behavior and decide that these are behaviors of a friend, and then friendship becomes a background, and then it guides our future acts of interpretation. These acts of interpretation build the scenario, and the scenario in turn guides the interpretation. So there's a cyclical and reinforcing relationship. There's a process, cyclical process between scenario and individual acts of interpretation. Now, what about desire? Because this chapter is about desire. All this work is done to make a point about the place of desire in psychology, in cultural psychology. Desire isn't the wish to attain an object, according to Salvatore. It is instead the wish to maintain the scenario within which the object is pursued or the object is wanted. Desire is the force of the scenario, we can say. That's my paraphrase of Salvatore. Desire, we can say, is the force of the scenario. Let's make a reference to love stories. If we think according to Salvatore's framework, we shouldn't locate desire within a love story. We shouldn't locate it in how people feel about each other. We shouldn't say that this person desires this person and the other person in turn desires the other person. We should locate desire in how they feel about their love story. Their desire is to have that love, to have that narrative within which they are significant to each other. So they want that background, not just each other. They want, the desire is for a kind of love story, not just another person. This makes sense of, among other things, St. Augustine's observations from a long time ago, that desire is ultimately about desire. So if one of the lovers in a love story betrays the other one, the person who was supposedly desired is still there, but the scenario is now damaged, it is shattered, and the love story is gone. Another example that I really like is in this famous book, The Old Man and the Sea. The main character, Santiago. If you pay attention, if you pay some attention to the story, we will realize that he doesn't just want to fish. He's not just going out there to attain a fish. His desire isn't just directed at fishing. Instead, he wants the scenario. He wants his place in his town. He wants to have a reputation, for example. He wants to protect his relationship with other people who see him, regard him as a fisherman, a successful fisherman. In the next video, I am going to read a few pages from Haruki Murakami, this little book which contains fragments of Murakami's work. The title is actually Desire, and related to Salvatore's discussion of desire. Thank you for your attention. Thank you to the new subscribers, and I will speak with you soon in the next video. If you have any comments, questions, feel free to get in touch with me.